Okay.
I have not shoveled down a lunch that fast in years.
I didn't even attempt it.
I'm so sorry. I was on a call with a faculty. I'm so sorry.
No problem. Thanks, Ann. Okay, well,
You weren't shoveling down lunch?
No, no, you know what? You know what's happening is they're having trouble copying the courses into Blackboard because Blackboard can be such a pain. And so she's like, and she needs to get it done now because, as you know, classes start next week. So it was like, okay.
So we're going to go ahead and get started. We want to thank everyone for joining us today in our presentation titled, "What Does Universal Design for Learning Mean for Faculty?" And I am Kim Colangelo, the Director of Learning Design and Technology. So I'd like to take a moment just to introduce you to our panelists. First, we have Rob Koch. And Rob, am I saying that correctly? Is it Koch?
No.
How should I pronounce it?
Say the word truck.
Okay, got it. Koch. Rob is the Assistant Dean of the Collaborative Learning Commons and leads the Learning Success Center, where learning consultants use UDL to support and build student confidence in their consultations. Tom Lenahan is a professor in the Early Childhood Education Department. He's a faculty who has dedicated much time and effort to the UDL process in his courses and engaging with students. Next, we have Laura Dowland, a professor of biology in the Biology and Chemistry Department, who calls herself relatively new to UDL, but she really is really digging in and committing to the process to improve her course designs by including UDL, so we applaud her for that. And finally, we have our instructional designer, Anne-Marie Dumont. She works with faculty, encouraging UDL inclusion in her course design work with faculty. So to get started, we're going to invite Rob to lead us in a reflective activity that demonstrates universal design from the student perspective. So I'll turn this over to Rob.
Thanks, Kim. You are not the first on my last name. You won't be the last on my last name. It's really not an issue at all. So I'd like everybody to take a minute and close your eyes. And we're going to go back to your college days or your high school days. And we're going to put together two memories. And the first one is this. I'd like you to remember a time when you really enjoyed learning some particular content. And I'd like you to think about that situation. Was the content easy to learn? Did it give you what you needed to learn it? Was your teacher able to communicate in a way that worked for you to be able to learn it? I want you to think about how that felt when you had everything you needed and were able to get everything you needed to learn that material. Now I want you to set another memory that's going to sit alongside this one. And it's of a time when you really struggled, when you had trouble learning something. Maybe the content wasn't clear. Did you have what you needed to learn it? Was your professor or your teacher able to explain it? Were they attending to how you learn? If you needed resources, were you able to get those resources? Did you have the confidence to ask? And I want you to compare those two experiences and think about their differences, the difference between having and not having what you need based on your ways of learning. And I want you to think about the students in your life who may have the similar kinds of experiences you've had. You can open your eyes. We're not going to ask you to share those because learning is intensely personal. But I do want you to keep those ideas in mind of the challenges you faced, but also the joys you felt. And as we move through today's presentation on universal design, I'd like you to think about how your experiences might be replicated using things from universal design to help connect your students to the content in more and more effective ways. All right, so I'm going to turn it back over to Kim. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you, Rob. That was a great illustration. So we want to ask you to keep that thought process, those experiences in mind, because in this session, our goal is not to mandate or tell faculty what to do, but instead to provide information and have you hear from your peers what they've done with UDL and why they've done it. And additionally, if you have not been fully satisfied with the results and response from your students, perhaps without revamping the entire course, we do not want you to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but perhaps there are some application principles or in small ways you can make some tweaks or adjustments that will best support your students and support your vision in meeting your outcomes more successfully. We're hoping that this presentation today is going to help to define what UDL is, to review your course and employing a UDL principle. Again, not to throw out the entire course, just to make a tweak to an existing course to see if it better aligns itself with your expectations for the results and outcomes of the course. And third, to compare and contrast the class experience that we're talking about with and without UDL. So first, we'd like to talk with Tom. Tom has quite a bit of experience in UDL, and we would like him to help to define it and to help us to understand what it really means. Tom?
When I think about the definition of UDL, I have to start, for me, the why, why get interested in UDL. And essentially, I just came to the realization that I needed a way to understand and reach sort of all the different kinds of learners that I had in front of me as a teacher, instructor. And so I looked around and found universal design, and sort of a story that is often told about how universal design came to be is it started with actual universal design, the kind of architecture piece where folks were trying to make roads and buildings more and places more accessible to folks. And so one time there was, there was a crossing in the road, and they decided to cut the curbs and put ramps in so that folks using wheelchairs could get easily across the road when the light changed to, the walking man instead of the angry flashing palm, it said, okay, come on. And so what they found was, though, when they did that and they made the ramps, people using wheelchairs could get across fine. That's great. But also all kinds of other people started using the ramps in ways that weren't anticipated, like folks with strollers could push their children through, folks using a scooter or one of those long boards you always see those folks on go zooming down. And so you could shopping carts, there was all kinds of ways that folks took advantage of the ramps. So that made the street corner more open to all those different kinds of folks with very different needs. And so the universal design for learning idea is to take that to how you do your course and how you do your instruction, so that by making some choices about how you engage folks, what you teach, and how you teach it, you can make decisions in the beginning that can include all kinds of different learners. And the framework kind of points out, like what I just said, like it answers the why question. Why are we having this class, this course? Why are we doing this? And that's the engagement piece. And then there's the what are we doing? And that's the finding ways to represent things for all folks, multiple ways of representing. And then finally the how, which is the action and assessment kind of pieces. So how do you express yourself and how do you demonstrate your learning? So we'll talk more about that, but that's sort of the origins and the basic nature of universal design for learning. Thanks, Kim.
Thank you, Tom. That was very helpful. So now if we keep that in mind, what Tom just shared with us, and keep the thought that the caveat that UDL impacts students, we want to talk to each of our panelists and get their input on some important questions. I'd like to start with Laura. And Laura, as a faculty relatively new in your perception, I think you've got some experience, but you're saying new, to learning and applying UDL to your courses, and appreciating that you and the rest of our faculty already have very full schedules. You decided to make time in your schedule to add UDL to your course design. What motivated that, and what improvements have you seen in your course or courses and the engagement with your students as a result of applying some of those UDL principles?
Yeah, so my motivation was really out of frustration that I was seeing or feeling like my students weren't able to show me what knowledge they actually had on traditional exams. So I was sort of having a hallway conversation, like Tom and I like to say, one day with Tom, and he gave me some input on alternative methods maybe to assess, just planting little seeds of ideas. And so I guess that's where I jumped into UDL, not even knowing that I was jumping into UDL. But again, it was out of really a frustration of wanting to make things better for my students and allowing my students to show me what they know, in addition to traditional exams. So my students still take traditional exams. They're in allied health and they're going to have to do board exams, and I need to prepare them for that. And I need some consistency, but I've offered them alternative ways to take those exams, so they can take them orally with me. They can come into my office and, they can do manipulatives and explain them to me. So I really let them sort of come to me and say, this is how I would like to show you that I know the material. And I've had a few students take advantage of it. It's made a difference in their actual exam scores as well. But I think it makes a big difference just in them feeling like they have some control over what's happening in the classroom with their grades and stuff.
That's a really interesting perspective, that they have some control over that. That's really helpful. It helps them to become their own advocate, doesn't it? Once they feel that sense of empowerment. So really good points. Thank you, Laura. Rob, in your work with learner support, what do you see UDL doing to support the students you serve? And could you give us any examples of students who've benefited from this approach?
Absolutely. The Learning Success Center, in changing it, many of you know of it as academic support, and I really dislike that term. We went with learning success because we wanted to start focusing on how the learner learns rather than focusing on how we support them through content. So we use growth mindset to try and convince them and help them discover that it's not that they can't do a thing, it's that they do not yet have the pieces they need to be able to do that thing. And our means of achieving that mindset is universal design for learning. We use the VARK method, visual, auditory, reading, kinesthetic, just because it's easiest when we're working with all of the students who come through the center. And we don't begin by saying necessarily, what are you having trouble with? We begin by asking them, how do you learn? We start by engaging our learners, as people. The content comes second. The method of learning comes first. And so we do this not so we can limit them to one of these 4 methods, but so that we can play to the method that they're strongest with while adding in pieces of the other methods to expand how they learn. So for example, we have students, and this began really with School of Nursing because the nursing students tend to congregate in various places in the library and all in one shade of panic or another. And they would say, well, how do I do this? I said, well, how do you learn? And this person says, well, I read everything, but I said, is that the best way for you to learn? They say, well, I actually like to see it. I like to have visuals. I said, so why aren't you doing that? And we shifted them to color coding, to developing strategies for understanding the nursing process, for drawing pictures of the brain and of what does the layout of a space look like. And once they began integrating the visual, they began having more success in class. We have one student who cannot remember a thing unless she hears it. So I asked her, how do you learn? She says, well, I listen to things. I said, well, how have you used that in this course? She says, I haven't. I said, why not? She said, I didn't know I could. Your learning is your own. So the student began listening to everything and the grades improved. We had another student, anatomy and physiology, trying to read and listen to everything, but he's a kinesthetic learner. He learns by doing, and he learns visually. And the minute we had him writing and repeating his lists, then he could go to any image he found on Google or in his book. He'd pull that image down. He'd say, oh, that term's on the list. And he was pulling terms from, the 72nd term on the list, and he knew it was there. He said, oh, we got both versions of that, the frontal and the upper and lower. And then he was explaining to me the differences and why things were there where they were. The minute he adopted this process of actually attending to how he learned, his grades on his quizzes shot up into the 90s. All it took was us attending to how the learner learns and then bringing the content to the learner, rather than bringing the learner to the content and telling them they have to learn it this way, or this is the only way I'm giving it to you. So that's what we've done. We've seen great success with that here.
Awesome. Thank you, Rob. And just by way of an add-on, I have a resource on how you learn, and I'll be making that available to any faculty that would like that, if they want to incorporate that in their course, or they'd like to use it as some kind of a tool to assist you in helping your students advocate for the way that they learn. I'll be sure to share that with everyone. But next, I'd like to ask Anne, our instructional designer, what is it about UDL that you share with faculty in support of their course design? And what does UDL look like with regards to the work that you do with faculty?
Well, first of all, I want to make sure that we start out with not throwing everything out, having to redo every single thing. It's really identifying specific things. And I think maybe Laura and Tom will go over what that could possibly look like. But it's really identifying 1 or 2 things that you could change. So I do have a visual I can share with you. One of the things that folks were saying, I think it was actually Jessica Klusky who said, you're talking to me about universal design, but I don't see it. I need to see it. So her being the visual learner, we tried to put something together. I found this syllabus online. So this is just a random, I don't know where it is. It's somewhere in maybe, I don't know, Maryland or something. So on the left side is what most syllabi might look like, something that's very linear and has the information, whereas on the right, it's more compartmentalized. It's trying to get the end user to see things in combination with other things, whether it be instructor information, course description, learning objectives. And yes, it does take more pages, but there's at least a little bit more white space. The font size is 12. I did use Arial, and there are other types of fonts that you can use. They don't have to necessarily be Arial, but they don't have those little feet on it. And apparently that helps the learner. It's a It's really about cognitive overload and really trying to make sure that you provide the simplicity as you can. So it was just really compartmentalizing this information. And I tried to make sure that what was ever on the left side is also on the right side. And just categorizing the information in terms of what are the expectations for the student. I think in a previous presentation, we talked about that universal design can be inclusive of everyone and the types and the style in which they work and learn. So this is just one example. So in terms of how I would work with faculty would be to see what it is that they're interested in. If they're interested in maybe looking at the syllabus or maybe looking at a course and seeing what we can do from there in terms of incorporating and providing resources.
I really appreciate that point, Ann, too, about using a sans serif font instead of a serif font. Students and adults alike read it easier. So even if it's not a major visual change, it makes it much easier for your students to be able to read it. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. Next, we'd like to talk to Tom, because Tom has dedicated a tremendous amount of time to UDL and has a very, very good understanding of it, both theoretically and by its application. So Tom, what could you tell us about UDL that you feel has impacted your courses and the student experience? And do you have any success stories to share with us?
Okay, thanks, Kim. Well, let me think. So a couple of things. One thing is that I think you could be starting to think like, so all right, this sounds sort of interesting. Like, what do you actually do though? And so I've found that a little bit of an overview of the framework is helpful to answer that question. Like, what does this really look like in practice? And but a couple of things before I go there is I kind of see this framework. It can seem a little overwhelming, but it's really like a pair of glasses. It's a way to look at things, a frame, a lens of things that you already have to do in order to step into a classroom or to put up an online course. You have to sort of know why you're doing it. You have to know what you're going to teach, the stuff that you're going to teach, and you have to sort of know how you're going to figure out if anybody learned anything or not. So you have to figure out the the how, the why, and the what. Anyway, so this is just a kind of way to look at that. And one sort of misconception I just want to, I don't know if anybody's sort of thinking it this way, but you might be hearing that like, we're going to create 20 different syllabus so we meet everybody's needs. But no, the idea is that we look at some aspects that you can design of a course that by changing that, you'll meet a lot of people's needs. So remember the curb cut that I was talking about before. I'll just share my screen. And just for fun, I will show you a curb cut here. So, this is a curb cut, and you can see that folks can use all different ways you can use the curb. You can use the crosswalk. So as I was saying before, universal design, it's like this framework. It's the why, what, how. And so the why is like, why are you having this course? How do you engage folks? How do you bring out their ability to sustain interest and to understand the course and what's expected? And how do you help them regulate their emotions so that they can stay engaged with the material? And then there's the what, the multiple means of representing kind of the information. That's an imperfect term, but the content of what you're trying to get across or help them facilitate their learning of. And then finally, how the multiple means for action and expression of their learning. So those are the kind of big framework, the big bubbles. And I'll put this in the chat, this link, but this is, a great handout that CAST does. And they're some of the first founders of UDL, and they have done K through 12 learning and also higher ed. And so this is from their higher ed website. And so if you only have a few minutes and you want to go around the web and try to find more information, this is a great place to start. And you'll see that they have, these different kind of categories for each of the why, what, and how. How do you recruit interest? How do you sustain effort? And how do you do self-regulation? And then perception and language and expression and communication. So all these things that you can think about when you're thinking about designing your course or creating your course or even tweaking an existing course. And so to give you an example of tweaking an existing course, so for my field, early childhood, it happens to be in a bit of a crisis right now, precipitated by the COVID pandemic. And what it meant was that suddenly there weren't enough childcare providers. A lot of people left the field. And what it's meant for us more directly in our department is that many of our students are hired right away. The minute they sort of show any interest in the field, they go do an observation and folks will say, hey, you're doing okay with kids. So they're hired. The certification requirements have been relaxed, and so they get hired. And what that's meant for us is a blurring between in-service and pre-service teaching. So we used to have teachers that we were helping to learn to teach, and we had them for a while before they went out in the field, and now it's all smushed together. And that's meant a lot of things, but one thing for student it's meant is that there's a lot of anxiety, a lot of plates they have to keep in the air. A lot of them are working. They have some great opportunities, and they're working a little bit before they were intending to. That's a lot of logistic complexity for them. So one of the things I've had to focus on is self-regulation in my classes. How do you have the emotional state that fits the class, that fits the situation? And a simple thing that I did, a tweak, an example of universal design, is to create these working agreements. And they're simply having a little brainstorming session, one of the very first class, if not the first, of answering the question, how do we need to treat each other to have the best class ever? So how do we need to treat each other to have the best class ever? We list all those in the first class, and we create these working agreements. And every single class, we review them really quick. We don't necessarily read them. I just say, hey, are these okay with everybody? Do we need to modify them? And if there's a certain class where we're going to have, I can anticipate there's going to be some content that might cause stress. I can say, okay, we're going to really want to pay attention to this one, valuing everybody's perspective, because today we're going to talk about a subject that often is hard for folks or whatever it is. So it's a real tool to help with the emotional regulation for the class. And it's a fairly simple thing to do. And I do it online and in person also. So that's an example of just a tweak in the engagement kind of part of the framework. So the other example I wanted to give you is about tweaking an in-class activity. So how I represent knowledge, and this I sort of think about as scaffolding knowledge with students' prior learning. And I do quite a bit of this, and I'll just give you one example. For the child development class I teach, I have to teach Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which you might be familiar with from your introduction to psychology that you might have had. And so basically it's the idea that there's a hierarchy to the needs we have. First, we have to get our basic needs met, food, clothing, and shelter, and then have a sense of belonging, and then have some agency, the ability to make a difference in the world, and then on up to self-actualization. And so there's that theory. And in order to teach that to folks, we start with a scenario, a little story about a family that I worked with in a homeless shelter back in the day when I was doing that kind of work, supporting families. And so we tell that little story, and then I say, what do they need? And the students respond to that question by putting one idea per index card. So they end up with a pile of index cards, and then they can take those pile of index cards and I say, well, which ones do you think are the most important, or the ones they need to meet first? And they can arrange their index cards, and suddenly they have a hierarchy, right? Often they need food, they need shelter. And so they create their own version of the hierarchy of needs. We go around to other students and compare what we came up with. And finally, as a class, we have this hierarchy of needs we created, and we can compare and contrast it with the more formal theory and add the new pieces that they need to really flesh it out to be more like the theory. So that's a simple example of finding a way to represent the information that connects with the students. Well, I'll mention that later. So we'll keep going. So that's that, right? And then there's, you already heard Lara talk about different ways to express what you've learned and different assessment techniques. So that's what the framework is. And it's the good news and the bad news that it's a little bit complex. There's 3 different things and there's a bunch of parts, but that may be the bad news. But the good news is you can tweak any one of those and make a difference for your students. And you only have to pick one. You don't have to create a whole new course. So kind of the last couple of things I wanted to leave you with was, this is an example. It's a good metaphor, universal design for learning. It's like, here's the ramp built into the stairway, right? There's not a ramp on the separate to one side of the other where people who are using wheelchairs or need a ramp have to go over there and not be with everybody else. So it's all included in one thing. So there's the ramp and the stairways. And I've said this the last couple of times we've done this workshop, that I just can imagine what people on skateboards do with this, but I want to see that. So that's it. So I think I'll stop there. Feels like it's a good point to stop and turn it back to you, Kim.
Well, okay. Thank you so much, Tom. That was some good
You're
stuff.
welcome.
Love that staircase. That's amazing. Talk about integration and inclusion. It was a beautiful example. So with these things in mind, here are some real constructive opportunities, what you could apply, what you could tweak, how these things are looked at, how we might take something we already have. We never want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's find ways to use what we have and just make it better if we can. And if it helps our students, then we're in good shape. But now let's ask our panel a few other questions. For example, how are equity, justice, and a student voice impacted by applying UDL?
I'll go ahead and field that one. When we think about learning, and just to frame this, before I was an administrator here, I was a writing center director and an administrator of academic programs in several other places. And I was a professor of English for 13 years, focusing on technology integration and writing in the disciplines. Writing is a huge kinesthetic learning model. It is probably our most powerful method of learning. When we think about equity and we think about the students who have and the students who don't, we often try to figure out ways to help one, help the other, and it becomes a competition. UDL, while not a panacea, we don't want to say that because the minute we do, there will be an exception. UDL gives us the best chance to level the playing field because instead of focusing on the content, it focuses on the learner. It doesn't say, understand this writing content, understand this biology content, understand this math content. It says, how do you learn? It invites agency because it invites the student to take ownership of their own learning. When a student comes to me and says, well, this professor stinks because blah, 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 my first question is, the first thing I do is not empathize with, oh, awful professor, because that's not cool. The first thing I do is, well, how can you control the situation? What can you change in how you learn to take command? And they say, well, all they do is lecture. Okay, so do you have the lecture notes? Well, yeah. Well, how do you learn best? Oh, I'm visual. So let's take your notes and start finding pictures. Moving students from the context of the professor is pushing learning on me which unfortunately is how most students come through all of this, to one of, I'm inviting you to show me how you learn so that we can help you get this content in a way that works for you, empowers, strengthens, and it creates a sense of equity, because this was designed for, historically, people with accessibility needs, but it works for everyone. As Tom pointed out, it's a level playing field. If you have the ramp, you can get down onto the street and then back up onto the sidewalk. If you have the ramp, it doesn't matter where you came from or what you have, we're attending to you. So we get you to where you need to be using tools that work for you. And we can move you forward at different rates of speed, depending on how well you integrate the things you already do. And then we can expand your tools from there. So that creates some movement towards equity in a way that other methods may not. And that's why this is such a huge thing for us in learning success, because we have to be ready for any student coming through that door.
Thank you, Rob. That was great. Now, Lara, you mentioned assessments earlier, and the way you now look at assessments. So what type of assessment do you use to determine if UDL has benefited your course? Or do you have to pull from a number of different perspectives in order to achieve that?
Yeah, so I think I rely now mostly on qualitative assessments. Again, as a STEM person, I tend to like numbers and quantitative data, and I haven't done that around the UDL work that I did, but I do notice a big difference qualitatively in the class. Again, that students have some say in showing me how they learn, that they're learning how they learn, and so I think the qualitative data side of it has been surprising to me, but very rewarding. And I think it's something that we need to, capture more often as an assessment piece, is that qualitative side of, what's happening in the classroom, and did that work or not. Can be as simple as, feedback from students, and maybe the 2 or 3 students that took advantage of what I offered, they did better, on their exams or in the class.
Excellent. What about emotional engagement? Does that emotional regulation come into play with the UDL and student engagement?
Yeah, I would say it does, but I first I kind of want to build a bit on what Laura was saying, in that there's kind of 2 questions, right? So there's the question of, how do you know if universal design is a useful tool in a course? So that's like assessing at the level of the course and how it's going. And then there's the, how do you know if particular students are learning? And so one of the things that I've tried this semester is using a consistent kind of formative assessment. It's not graded. It's called a low stakes assessment, right? No grade. And for every class, people answer the question, and we answer in a different way. So you might write, you might talk about it, but you answer the question. So what did I know before, and what do I think now? So what did I think before, and what did I think now? Because no is kind of a different question, but and that had given me a lot of insight about the kinds of constructs, the kinds of ways people are understanding what we're trying to do, and so allowed me to assess sort of the effectiveness of particular instructional activities in a given day and tweak them the next time. So so for student learning, I guess what I'm encouraging from a UDL perspective is this idea of formative low stakes assessment that is for your benefit, to tweak the instruction and not necessarily to impact a grade. So that's one thing. And then Kim, your question though was about emotional regulation. And I think that yeah, universal design is a way, it's a framework that allows you to think about that, right? So traditionally we think about what information do we have to get across, and how'd we do? And with universal design, that whole engagement piece, the why of the course, and not just why are we teaching the course, but why would a student bother to show up from week to week? Answering those questions can have a lot to do with emotional regulation and a feeling of safety. And that was very important during the pandemic, where a lot of folks' lives were somewhat out of control. So finding simple ways that were in the instructor's purview. Like one thing you might think is, well, that's not really what professors or instructors do. That's student services. But I think there are some things that are in the instructor's purview that makes a difference, that can make a small difference and aren't that hard to do. Like that example I gave with the working agreements, that's simple. A couple others are just having the course structured in such a way that it's predictable. And so the expectations are really clear. There's a sense of who the instructor is as a person. And, one of the ways we've been operationalizing this stuff already at the Mount is through the Faculty Academy and the Real Talk methodology. That's a real good way to do some of these. So if you ever have a chance to do that, I encourage you to think about that, because there are some great strategies there for both this, how do you connect with and have a authentic kind of relationship that's appropriate with students, and then this other thing with the alternative assignments, how do you sort of differentiate the assignments so that they fit folks, and that you're presenting the information in a way that's connects with different learners. So that's one thing we're kind of already doing. But so the point is that they're kind of intertwined. You have to have the students feel safe and be able to be calm and regulate their emotions in order to access the rest of the course. So that's a long answer to a short question. And now back to you, Kim, with sports.
Sorry, doing traffic today. So I really, no, that was not long-winded at all, Tom. I think it was packed with a lot of very useful information. It's a big topic, and we're certainly not going to be able to present everything that you need to know about UDL in this one session. But I think our goal is to try to help people appreciate there are small things you can do now that can actually reap a significant reward and make you feel like you are reaching your students. Perhaps there's areas where you don't feel that's happening right now. And with some of these small tweaks, it can make a difference. And we wanted to share just not only the process, but some of the results when people have done that. Some of your peers have done that. So at this stage of the game, what we'd like to do is see what are the next steps based on what you've heard already. We're going to ask our panelists, what would you do next? So Rob, what are your next steps?
Well, learning success is taking our training, our professional development modules, and moving them entirely into Blackboard with Anne-Marie's help. And we are very excited to do that so that we can have anybody see how we prepare the learning consultants to do this work. And so that's a big initiative that my staff are actually engaged in right now. They've taken that on themselves as an exciting part of what they do. We'll be rolling pieces out for the next, the first level is coming out this year, and universal design is a priority item on it, as is equity. So I invite anybody who wants to see how learning consultants are trained to let me know, and we'll add you to the sandbox and to the training course so that you can see what's happening and how we do things. I like transparency, and that's one way to achieve it. The other thing is this: there's been a couple times in every presentation today where we've talked a little bit about vulnerability. And I know some of our colleagues on this panel are going to bring it up in more substantial ways. But I'm just going to say, as a former writing professor and as a former, well, as a lifelong learner and reflective practitioner, I don't expect any classroom to go 100%. And usually I bomb something every semester, even after 15 years in the classroom. Because our students are constantly changing, we must also constantly change too. And boy, that sounds like Defense Against the Dark Arts. I don't accept that we lay it out and it's that way forever. So I'm constantly seeking the community to bounce ideas off of, not just when things go well, but to ask what if and when things go wrong. So one thing I offer to all of you is an opportunity that if you want to explore that and just bounce ideas off of me related to UDL or writing or how we use it here in Learning Success, to please come chat with me. I'm always happy to meet with you to explore ways to enhance what you do and to troubleshoot, or if you want to point out to me things that we can do differently in our office. I believe that dialogue is an important part of being lifelong learners. So that's what's next for us in Learning Success.
Great, thank you. And how about you with instructional design? What are your next steps?
One of the things that I would certainly encourage is we have some resources that are available. For example, on Blackboard, we have this faculty learning resources for faculty. And, it's hard when it's the third one around, I got to tell you. So part of some of the topics that we have are engaging classroom activities, and you can self-enroll into this. So it's not something that you have to go through anybody. If that's something you'd like to do, if you'd like to meet with me, I will tell you there is zero expectation that you should know any of this. I went to school for this, and you are the subject matter expert. That is what you went to school for. That's what your expertise is. So I think this was where that relationship really works, is making sure that I don't get into your business in terms of what that content is, but rather how can we streamline it so it becomes consumable and accessible to the bulk of your population. Some of the other topics include assessment, UDL, as we're talking about today, and then just organizational course design. One of the things we talked about in the other class was looking at your formatting of your course. Does it flow? Does it make sense? Is there logical sequential order so that the student can navigate with ease? Those are the types of things in terms of next steps, and encouraging that kind of maybe diversity in some of your activities that may not be limited to a multiple choice assessment, but maybe have a case study so that you can incorporate some of those other items into. So it may hit all those marks, but you might be able to do it through a story.
Great, good suggestions. Laura, how about you? What are your next steps?
Yeah, so I have two very concrete next steps. So one of them is to take one of my courses, not all of them, but one of my courses, and take a look at the student learning outcomes and make sure those are aligned day to day with the materials that we're covering and how I'm covering it in one particular course. And then my other next step is to continue to tweak my syllabus to make it as universally accessible for as many students as possible. So thanks to a little bit of push again by Tom and Jessica Kuski, I delved into that a little bit previously. Tom gave me a great rubric to assess the syllabus by UDL, and I have some pieces I could push a little more. So that's my other next step.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And Tom, how about you? What do you have in mind for next steps?
So I have a couple of things. One, for my courses, I have been thinking. I've just been thinking, I haven't doing a lot of doing yet, but thinking a lot about grading and what might make sense. And I've heard some ideas of contracted grading and some other things that I've been, slowly dipping little toes in that water and just thinking about. And so that's one thing on a personal level. And we're getting pushed by the state kind of into competency-based assessment of our students for their certification. So that's another thing. And then I'm always interested in how can we expand the water cooler that we've been using, like to have these conversations about reflective practice and how we could formalize that a little bit. And figure out ways that we could talk about that and talk about success, as Rob was talking about things that work and things that don't work, because we all have those. And so those are my kind of next steps.
Awesome, thank you. I did want to piggyback a little bit on what Rob was saying earlier about vulnerability. And I think originally this was something that Tom brought up in a previous conversation. It's a challenge for faculty to sometimes, acknowledge that things are not going the way they want them to go. And we just want to make sure that you know that you have support and that you have a safe place to talk about things that you're not happy with and that you'd like to maybe tweak somewhat, not redo the whole course, or maybe you do, that's totally your prerogative. But we want to support you. We want you to know that we see ourselves as partners, not as people that are going to evaluate or report, but rather how can we help you get to your best course as you see it. And in learning design and instructional design, that is not touching content. That's making recommendations that might help your students gain greater clarity, have greater success, have a flow that is more sequential to their learning, and have a scaffolding impact so that all of that foundational learning actually gets you to the point where you have laid out your objectives and you've achieved them, and the students have that sense of success as well. So please know that we're here to support you and don't want you to feel isolated or stuck if something's not working. We're committed to continuous improvement and we want to work with you. We certainly don't want to do anything that would work against you. So I just want to put that quick plug in. And I'd also like to ask you all if you'll take 30 seconds and if you will please complete this 4-question poll for us. It just helps us to kind of design where we move forward from here and whether or not a topic like this and a presentation style of delivery like this was helpful. So if you don't mind just completing that very quickly, I would deeply appreciate that. Okay, I think we have 100% of our folks who have completed this. Thank you so very much. That was very quick. Thank you. Let me just end the poll. Perfect. And I will handle the rest of this later. So at this stage of the game, I would just like to let you know that the recording of this will be housed on the employee portal should you decide you'd like to go back to it and you'd like to review something. It'll be available 24/7, 365, whatever you'd like. And also, we'd like to give you a few minutes. We have some time. Do you have some questions or comments about UDL? Have you tried it? And has it worked for you? Or have you seen an area where you think this might be helpful? We'd love to hear back from you. I want to make sure I give people a chance to think about it. If no one has any comments or questions, that's great. I can give you a few minutes of your life back. How nice is that, right? And please know that should you think of something after the presentation, you can reach out to any of us. We'd be happy to share whatever we know, or if we need to do a little research on something, if there's a question you have that we don't know the answer to, we will do the research and find it and get back to you. So one last shot if anybody has any questions or comments. I don't want to cut anyone off.
I just wanted to comment and put a huge shout out to Anne Dumont for the work she's done for me personally and your department in general. The work she put in to help me transform not only my exploration healthcare class, but my capstone course was absolutely, to say it was a smashing success would be an understatement. I cannot tell you and I think, I had a lot of ideas because I've been through Faculty Academy and really trying to work to engage the student, look through their lens and all of that. But theoretically, that's one thing, but actually getting that to work and needing the expertise of someone like Ann said, she went to school for this, I did not, and to bring all my ideas, it was almost like she got inside my head and brought all my ideas to life in such a way that I am forever in debt to her. So I scream from the rooftops. I tell Dr. Eisler every chance I get how wonderful your department is, all of you. And I just can't thank you enough, Ann. And I felt I needed to put that out there for all to hear. So.
That's
Thank you.
very kind of you. I'll pay you later.
Oh, stop. But even just the work she's done to help the students, and we use universal design in a lot of the more dry research assignments that we were doing is just, I can see it in their work. I can see it in their motivation, and certainly in their outcomes. So.
That's so nice of you to say that, Kelly. And the truth is that Ann is really, really good at what she does. And I think unless you've had that experience, you don't realize people think they know what instructional design is, but it's truly a partnership. Wouldn't you say that, Ann? It's truly a partnership with faculty.
Absolutely. I would say, and for me, I don't have an ego. I kind of like leave that at the door. And I always say, never want to be the smartest person in the room. And I kind of like just deferred all of that expertise into Ann's court. And it was just, I think if instructors want to approach this, they really do have to allow that space, for their ego to kind of sit outside of what they're doing, because the outcomes at the end are just so incredible, like exceeded any expectation. I didn't even know what my expectations were, but they exceeded them tremendously. So
Boy,
thanks
what a
again.
testimony. Thank you so much. Ann's clapping. Oh, I see that we have a couple of messages in the chat regarding learning styles. I have that resource I'm going to share with everyone. And I see Rob also has a resource. So we'll make sure that all of that gets shared with everyone so that you'll be able to support your students that way, help them become their own best advocate for their learning style, and then find the tools they need to make it work for them. So we'll do that as well. Well, thank you all so much. We really appreciate that you've taken time to come to this presentation. And I'm going to ask my panelists here if they'll please stay on the Zoom line. And thank you so much for the rest of you, and enjoy the 8 or 9 minutes that you get back to spend on your day. And thanks again for coming. I think Carrie doesn't realize that she's still on. Carrie, are you there?
She liked it so much, she's joining the club.
Oh, there she goes.
She's out of here.
She's like, yeah.
Hey, I just have to say you guys were awesome. You did a great job. I think this was very informative. And I just want to let you know, if you don't know yet, let's see, we had 29 attend the first session. We had 19 attend both the second and the third. So I think that when you think about that, that's a pretty significant number, right? So 4 or 5, that's 67 unique faculty that attended. None of them were duplicates. I think we have a total of 74 full-time faculty. So the fact that 67 attended, I just want to say, hey, kudos, guys. Good job. You did a great job, and really informative. There's some magic with a panel. This really, I thought, was amazing. What are your thoughts about it? Did you feel comfortable with what you delivered? Did you wish you had done anything differently, or we had done anything differently?
Kim, do you want to keep the recording on?
Oh, no, you can stop it now, Patty. Thanks.